videos, make sure and like and subscribe and, leave comments,
Absolutely.
of course. I'm doing all right. I've had a busy week. I'm also looking to pack up and move off to Wales. The restrictions out here are probably lifting by the end of the month. So by June 1st, I'm allowed to start viewing and start making a move and stuff like that. So packing up a lot of stuff. Hopefully I'm not going to miss the podcast. That would be a real shame. But yeah, I'm really just looking to get out there and stuff like that. And I'm glad you did that intro because I wasn't too sure what your take on the topic was going to be. So I'm glad that you kind of clarified that. And yeah, it's definitely going to be a fantastic conversation, man.
Definitely. Famous Amos, what's been up with you, man?
Nothing. Just such a boring week. It's pouring rain here in Minnesota. I got my blinds wide open. Usually I try to go with natural light in the room here, but blinds are open and it's not going to look so good. But what else is going on?
You got a new job this week. You don't have to say, but you did get a new job. That's about it.
I could technically say it. I'm not going to sprout too much, but I got a job. Let's just say in the realm of social media. I'll see how much where that goes. I'm basically managing a Twitter account, so we'll see where that goes with that. Once things kind of develop as the months go on, I'll probably say more. I mean, I could technically say it. I just rather not. But it is a pretty good opportunity. It's going to be really nice on the resume. And we'll see where it goes from there. But yeah.
Can you say that you had an interesting conversation with another podcast personality today?
Well, we had Robert Frank on our show last week, but not a big deal.
I thought the one you were having today with another big podcaster, you could have said, well, yeah, we did. I did involve a conversation with this guy, but I might be giving away too much.
Wait, which one?
There's so many bumps and sets, but there's no spike.
Exactly.
We'll discuss it on our show.
Yeah, but anyways, what's up, Conk?
Yeah, Conk, how you doing, man? By the way, guys, Conk is feeling very under the weather, so if he doesn't make it through the whole show, he might bounce out, and we might be the unholy trinity. But we'll see how long he can make it. But how you doing, Conk? Other than your little illness?
Oh yeah. I mean, I exist, so that's good. I woke up this morning, not under the best conditions, but I did wake up. So praise the Lord.
Philosophical as hell, man.
That's all I know, bro. Conte got nothing on me.
You're disappointed, man. I thought you believed in the prosperity gospel, man.
Yeah, I did not name nor claim the amount of vomit this morning. So that was a gift from above that I was not expecting.
I thought you'd take authority over, man. We're supposed to take authority over stuff like that.
Out of your mouth shall flow rivers of living bile.
Maybe if I donate to Kenneth Copeland, he can blow away my sickness.
I was just going to say, the wind of God.
While you blow chunks.
Yeah, we'll take turns. He'll blow air. I'll blow whatever comes out.
We'll take a Karen down. Maybe she can make you some soup while she complains about it.
Yeah. She'll have to talk to the soup manager.
Yeah.
Who manages soup as a concept?
Oh, man. Well, listen, guys, I've been doing good. I've just been no news is good news with me. Still loving things over here in Thailand. Just waiting things to shake out. Yeah, I've just been just doing a lot of walking, a lot of meditation, a lot of reading, a lot of learning. Just taking it easy. Been doing a lot of remote work as well, and threw together some little bit of prep for today's show. And other than that, it's been pretty chill, to be honest. Don't have any major, nothing really major to report.
Bobby, did your girlfriend happen to catch last week's episode?
She did not.
Ah, okay, just checking.
Yeah, I got to catch her up. I'm gonna have to send her a playlist.
Yeah, I think you're pretty safe in last week's episode. So for those of us just joining us, it was about Christian dating. So anybody, you could always go back and check that. But
oh yeah, for sure. So to get to our topic today, guys, we're going to start off with the video. And many of you have probably seen this video. I'm sure all the panelists here have. But for those of you who haven't, I'll just make a quick disclaimer. We don't bash people on the show. I mean, we joke around. You heard us just joking about Kenneth Copeland, and we'll keep it light. But we don't believe in tearing other people down just to elevate your own views. But we do advocate. I mean, I hate to say it this way, tearing down the views of others in a charitable, scholarly way. You could be a scholar and a gentleman and still disagree with someone, without making it personal. So, you'll see a lot of that. And some of us panelists might even disagree with our interpretation of the video. That remains to be seen. I'm looking forward to the discussion. So we are going to, I'm going to cue it up here real quick. Get on YouTube here. And give me a second to find it here. Okay. I'm going to share my screen. Include audio. And I'm going to mute myself out. And here we go. Got the Russian doll.
Ooh, we got that Inception.
What if I told you Jesus came to abolish religion? What if I told you voting Republican really wasn't his mission? What if I told you Republican doesn't automatically mean Christian, and just because you call some people blind doesn't automatically give you vision? I mean, if religion is so great, why has it started so many wars? Why does it build huge churches but fails to feed the poor? Tell single moms God doesn't love them if they've ever had a divorce, but in the Old Testament, God actually calls religious people whores. Religion might preach grace, but another thing they practice, tend to ridicule God's people. They did it to John the Baptist. They can't fix their problems, and so they just mask it, not realizing religion's like spraying perfume on a casket. See, the problem with religion is it never gets to the core. It's just behavior modification, like a long list of chores. Like, let's dress up the outside, make it look nice and neat. But it's funny, that's what they used to do to mummies while the corpse rots underneath. Now, I ain't judging. I'm just saying, quit putting on a fake look. Because there's a problem if people only know that you're a Christian by your Facebook. I mean, in every other aspect of life, you know that logic's unworthy. It's like saying you play for the Lakers just because you bought a jersey. See, this was me too, but no one seemed to be on to me. Acting like a church kid while addicted to pornography. See, on Sunday I'd go to church, but Saturday getting faded, acting if I was simply created to just have sex and get wasted. See, I spent my whole life building this facade of neatness, but now that I know Jesus, I boast in my weakness. Because if grace is water, then the church should be an ocean. It's not a museum for good people, it's a hospital for the broken, which means I don't have to hide my failure, I don't have to hide my sin, because it doesn't depend on me, it depends on him. See, because when I was God's enemy, and certainly not a fan, he looked down and said, I want that man. Which is why Jesus hated religion, and for it he called them fools. Don't you see so much better than just following some rules? Now let me clarify. I love the church, I love the Bible, and yes, I believe in sin. But if Jesus came to your church, would they actually let him in? See, remember he was called a glutton and a drunkard by religious men. But the Son of God never supports self-righteousness, not now, not then. Now back to the point, one thing is vital to mention. How Jesus and religion are on opposite spectrums. See, one's the work of God, but one's a man-made invention. See, one is the cure, but the other's the infection. See, because religion says do, Jesus says done. Religion says slave, Jesus says son. Religion puts you in bondage, while Jesus sets you free. Religion makes you blind, but Jesus makes you see. And that's why religion and Jesus are two different clans. Religion is man searching for God. Christianity is God searching for man, which is why salvation is freely mine and forgiveness is my own, not based on my merits, but Jesus' obedience alone. Because he took the crown of thorns and the blood dripped down his face. He took what we all deserved. I guess that's why you call it grace. And while being murdered, he yelled, Father, forgive them. They know not what they do. Because when he was dangling on that cross, he was thinking of you. And he absorbed all your sin and he buried it in the tomb, which is why I'm kneeling at the cross saying, come on, there's room. So for religion, no, I hate it. In fact, I literally resent it. Because when Jesus said, it is finished, I believe he meant it.
gay.
I mean,
Are you
in
coming
red
out,
pill
Amos?
terms, we've all heard the term chick crack, but that is called youth group crack.
Now, I'll be honest. I think the kid is talented. I mean, this was 8 years ago. I actually looked into him. He's a pretty stand-up guy. He's got a wife and kids. He's got a family. He lives in Hawaii with his wife. They run an online education ministry. So he's a stand-up guy. And I'll be honest, I don't know how much his views on this whole thing have evolved since then, because this was 8 years ago. I don't know if he still believes that or if he doesn't. But so here's kind of my spin on it, guys, and viewers, bear with me, because I'm pretty detailed when I disagree with something like this. So I'll just kind of take the parts that really jumped out at me, and then I'll throw it to you guys. Take however much time you guys want to parse it out, share your thoughts. Don't worry, you got an hour and a half. So, so the first thing that jumped out at me is he said, "What if I told you Jesus came to abolish religion?" I don't even have to quote much catechism or other documents. Like, just basic scriptures refute most of this poem or this word poetry, whatever this guy calls it. Jesus said in the Sermon on the Mount, one of the very first things he said is, "Do not think I've come to abolish the law or the prophets. I have not come to abolish them, but to fulfill them." And the law, the Mosaic law and the prophets was a religious system. Jesus was a member of this religious system. He was circumcised. In fact, Jesus kept the Jewish law, the Torah, more perfectly than anyone else could. So this notion that Jesus hates religion, because not only did he say that he hates religion, but he also said that Jesus hates religion. And just, in my opinion, there's no biblical evidence at all of that. I'm going to throw a link into the chat. You guys can check it out when you get a chance, or maybe I'll put it in the show description, where basically it refutes the second point. The second thing he said that really jumped out at me is he said, if religion is so great, why did it start so many wars? Now, most people, the first thing that's going to come to mind when they think of that, it's going to be the Crusades, which really was kind of like a counter to, Islam trying to invade the Holy Land. It was really, different popes commissioning armies to defend the Holy Land over like multiple centuries. But there's a Pew Research piece that I'll post in the chat here that gives pretty indisputable statistics about religious hostility around the world. And it is an inarguable fact that, with all due respect, Islam wages more religious war than anyone else in the world right now. And they have for many, many centuries. The majority of wars that are started are waged by Islam. Jews and Christians are actually the biggest victims of religious wars. And videos like this make people think that, I think it kind of gives Christians a bad rap, because it makes people think that Christians start all these wars. I mean, yeah, we'll go to abortion clinics with our picket signs and we'll, do different protests here and there peacefully. But this notion that Christians start wars, I just don't agree with. The other thing he didn't talk about is the hundreds of millions of people that were slaughtered in the name of atheistic communism. Religion aside, what about all the people that were killed by things like communism? He didn't mention any of that. I'm sure he was in his 20s at the time, so maybe he wasn't that deep into history like that. But, it's definitely something he glossed over. Also in Ecclesiastes chapter 3, verse 1 through 8, it says that there's a time for war and a time for peace. So the idea of absolute opposition to war is not biblical. Like, Scripture doesn't condemn war in the absolute the way this guy does. There is room that's left for, what we as Catholics call the just war doctrine that we get from St. Thomas Aquinas. Next thing he said, build big churches but fails to feed the poor. Now, I won't speak for Protestant and Orthodox, but the Catholic Church feeds a lot of poor people. They build lots of hospitals, schools, orphanages, and they feed a lot of people, like more than lots of other charitable organizations in the world combined. Like, they really do. So this notion of, the church neglecting the poor to build up churches, I just don't agree with that either. And I don't think the Bible does either, because every time I hear people criticize the church for giving away all, using all the money to build up these big churches, you could have used it for the poor. Well, who else said that, guys? When Jesus was sitting at the table and the sinful woman came in and anointed his feet with her tears and dried them with her hair and poured expensive ointment on her feet, who said, hey, don't use that expensive ointment. That could be used for the poor. That was Judas that said that.
Yeah,
and
he was the money man.
Exactly.
Checking the budget. Yeah.
Absolutely. And it even said that in John 12, verse 3. It even mentioned the fact that Judas helped himself to the purse and he really didn't care about the poor. So, she was actually, not to go off on too much of a tangent, but when this woman was anointing Jesus with this expensive oil, she was using expensive, precious products to build up the temple, because Jesus is the temple, right? He said he'll destroy this temple in 3 days and rebuild it. So I'll also throw in an American Thinker article that I wrote on this. When Notre Dame burned down a couple of years ago, there was $1 billion that was raised in just a couple of days. And there was a lot of fake outrage around the world. I call it Judas outrage on this subject, because people are saying, oh man, $1 billion, that can go feed the poor. So I don't have time to unpack all that. But if you guys are interested, I'll put the article there. Couple more before I throw it to you guys. And then I'll be done, I promise. He said, now that I know Jesus, I boast in my weakness. But he just got done saying that you're a fake Christian if you struggle with porn addiction. I know a lot of good guys, devout guys who love God, but they have true struggles with porn. I struggled with food addiction for a long time. Does that mean that I was a fake Sunday morning Christian because I ate too much for a long time? He doesn't leave room for sin and grace to work together. So that's another thing I didn't like. Another thing he said, better than just following some rules. What about the 10 Commandments? Are those no longer binding? Does he think that killing, stealing, adultery is now okay because Jesus abolished religion? In fact, you guys know about what they call the 6 antitheses in Matthew 5:32, where he says the old law says, eye for an eye, tooth for tooth, but I say to you, love your enemies, right? The old law says thou shalt not commit adultery, but I say to you, whoever looks at a woman lustfully has already committed adultery in his heart. So in a way, you could argue that Jesus not only didn't abolish the law, but he even made the law a little bit harder. It's just that we now have grace to help us keep it, right? Couple more. Or Matt, you know what? Let me do this. Let me throw it to you guys, because I don't want to just, I've only got 2 more. You guys cool with me doing my 2 more?
Yeah, go ahead, man.
Go for it. Run it up.
Yeah. I don't want to hog the limelight here, but then he says, religion says do, Jesus says done. So in other words, to me, it sounds like a form of antinomianism, which is basically that, the old argument of Luther that we're not saved by works. It's not about what we do. But it says multiple times throughout Scripture in Romans 2:13, it says, for it is not the hearers of the law who are righteous before God, but the doers of the law who shall be justified. Jesus said elsewhere, not everyone who says to me, Lord, Lord, will enter the kingdom of heaven, but only he who does the will of my Father who is in heaven will enter. Therefore, everyone who hears these words of mine and acts on them may be compared to a wise man who built his house on the rock. So, Jesus cares about what we do. Whenever it talks about the final judgment in Scripture, it always says that we will be judged according to our deeds. So this idea of what we do doesn't matter, that doesn't jive either. Finally, he said, religion is man searching for God, but spirituality is God searching for man. Again, to me, and I hate to use a $10 word, to me, that's another false dichotomy, because I believe that there's a place for both. I truly believe that religion and spirituality can coexist. And this notion that man is searching for God is somehow not genuine. Hebrews 11:6 says, without faith it's impossible to please him, for he that cometh to God must believe that he is, and that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. Matthew 7:7, Jesus said, ask and you shall receive, seek and you shall find, knock and the door shall be open. So God wants us to seek him. So I'll close by saying that the entire crux of this video, I believe, is unbiblical, because in James chapter 1, verse 27, it says, religion that is pure and undefiled before God the Father is this, to visit orphans and widows in their affliction and to keep oneself unstained from the world. So the Bible literally uses the word religion, and it tells us what pure religion is. You keep yourself pure and undefiled, and you help the poor and the orphans and the widows. So that's my take on it, guys. I'd love to hear what your guys' takes are. So Brooke, I'll throw it to you.
I wish you'd sent me your notes. That's a lot. That's a lot to take in.
Yeah.
I think I kind of have to ask a question though. Like, what do you think religion means? Because we're throwing around a lot of terms, and it is a matter of interpretation. So, what do you think? What do you think religion means? Let's start with that.
Well, if you break down the etymology, I believe the word comes from religare. I'll have to look up that word, but
Okay.
It simply means relating to God. It means, practicing certain spiritual disciplines that are organized.
Right. I'll take Robert Capone on this and basically say that religion is any attempt on the part of a human to establish a right relationship between something outside themselves. To backtrack it, the first religion was actually in the Garden of Eden, right? God said, don't eat of the fruit. Adam and Eve partook of the fruit, and the first thing they did was try to cover their sin or their shame with the fig leaves, right? That was the first religion. You could call them the Figians, whatever you want to call it, right? God eventually came and he provided them with the clothing. So we're getting, for me at least, I'm gonna get caught up on terms. I would think any attempt of man to reach God, I would call that a religion. And for me, I don't have a problem with people having religion. I think the spiritual aspects of the union with Christ and the incarnation, you can have any religion. In fact, the first century believers were Jews, as you quite rightly pointed out. They were in a completely different religion, and they were, they had a right standing with God and stuff like that. Now taking it back to the video, yeah, I would agree with a lot of your points in terms of, he went on to saying like how he was hiding a porn addiction, but at the same time, it's supposed to be a church house for the broken and stuff like that. Yeah, complete Gnosticism. That is, everybody in the church is walking around saying, I'm fine, but they're dying inside and they're suffering, and they don't think they could express it because, if you were a true Christian, you wouldn't have those problems, which is complete nonsense. A friend of mine used to call it the Christian mask that people would wear. I don't, in terms of the interpretation of Jesus, yeah, Jesus came and he did fulfill the law. It's fulfilled, right? So if you fulfilled the Mosaic economy, or you pay off, if you fulfill your mortgage, it's paid off. You don't keep paying towards the mortgage. So I would disagree with your assessment of what Christianity. It's not based on the Mosaic economy. It's based on life in the Spirit. So he's given us a higher principle, which is, the whole book of Galatians, where you made perfect by the hearing of faith or by the doings of the law. And Paul says, no, you begun in the Spirit, you continue to walk in the Spirit. The whole purpose of church, for that instance, is to teach people to walk by the Spirit. And how that works is when you're going too far, the Holy Spirit will stop you from doing certain things. So I think there's so much that we kind of see from a different perspective. We could probably fill the entire show, you and I, right?
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah, probably. Just to go back to the video, there were some things I understood. I agree, the Bible does make the distinction between the individual and the leadership of a country. So I agree with in terms of the righteous war defense. Talks about the soldier doesn't hold the sword in vain. A lot of people think Christianity is a pacifist religion. I don't necessarily agree with that entirely. No, I don't agree with that. Principles of self-defense and stuff. Totally agree with that. I agree you should watch out for the political aspect of religion, of any faith movement. Mixing Christianity with politics, I think, is a risky proposition. One is dealing with the morality between man and God. The other is supposed to be dealing with the morality between us, like people. Of course, they overlap. If I kill someone, I have the law, the earthly law will punish me and stuff like that. So there's a lot to unpack in that. But we'll keep the conversation going. I don't disagree with everything he said. I understand. I assume he's a Protestant. I think if I remember back in the day, he's he's kind of double-minded on a lot of other things that he's talking about. So yeah, but we'll get into it. I was taking some notes, so definitely.
For my hot take, I get where he's coming from, right? I think he's trying to attack the Pharisee attitude, right, where the rules and the law is supreme. You know what I mean? And I think most of us agree that that's not the case, right? Clearly, there's some fulfillment that's happened. There's some kind of interaction that happened post-Christ where that's no longer the thing, right? So I think we're all on the same ground of that. So I get that he's trying to fight that Pharisee attitude because, if you think you're saved by your works, which is like your church attendance and your tithing and showing everybody how nice and spiritual you are and, checking off all your boxes, we all know, that's not the same thing as like actually being saved, right? You can go to church every Sunday for your whole life and still not get it. You know what I mean? And I'm sure we can all think of examples of people that didn't do that. And those people also have that judgmental attitude. I go to church every Sunday, and they don't, those heathens. You know, that's kind of that Pharisaic heart. By the way, shout out to a really great metal band called In the Midst of Lines. They have a song called The Pharisaic Heart, and it's one of my favorite songs of all time. You guys should look that up. But I think what he's pointing out is good, but I don't think he needs to say the word religion. I think he's trying to say Pharisaic law binding, right? And another big thing that, like, excuse me, another thing that kind of points out too is that, like, how much scripture did he use in that? None, zero. It was a lot of sound bites and like popular terms and catchphrases that all rhymed for 5 minutes. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And there wasn't really any scripture. There wasn't really any exegesis. It was just him doing some cool poem, song, rap battle about how he feels about something. You know what I mean? We probably shouldn't take that as any kind of authority at all.
Yeah.
I mean, if that's your thing, cool, but don't take it as like, I would definitely not make that a sermon. You know what I mean? Which is kind of feel like what he's trying to do. So, you know.
I got to give Trump credit, man. I've been plagiarizing his thing for like the last 2 months where he says that the cure can't be worse than the disease. And I feel like in the process of this guy going so hard at, you know, the religious Pharisees, that he actually kind of becomes a Pharisee himself on with the other, in the other direction. It's almost like he's policing religious people, like kind of a spiritual.
Possibly.
Yeah. It's kind of like what we talked about before. Like, you know, usually when we hear us group, we talk about the word red pill. We're talking about specifically intersexual dynamics and like the male and female, you know, interactions. But people use the word red pill for everything. You know what I mean?
It was in a movie, I heard.
Yeah, just a little bit.
Hey, Brooke, are you red pilled on that? How to make that proper coffee there?
Oh yeah, baby.
Get
With a
them
little salt.
chopsticks. Get them.
The chop.
Down to the
George
molecular
Bruno, yeah.
level.
Yeah, but I mean, yeah,
Constantly.
people take those words and use it and abuse it to their sake, right? Like, this guy's a friend of mine, and I talk to him a lot. But there's a guy around called Red Pill Vegan, and so he's down with the, you know, the rational male and all those kind of stuff. But he also declares that vegan is the real red pill of diet, nutrition, and health. Too, right?
Really?
Yeah, and he's a pretty cool guy. But you know, I definitely don't agree with him on that. I don't think any of us do either. But it's just one of those things where there's a red pill for everything, and you know. Our Lord and Savior Elon Musk was tweeting about it recently as well. So, but I'm pretty sure he wasn't talking about the rational male. You know what I mean? So
You just gave me an idea, Conk.
yeah.
I'm going to start my own red pill channel, and it's going to be a red pill carnivore channel.
Ooh.
Come on.
And I'm going to call myself Carnivorpheus.
Morpheus.
And I'm the guy who's going to let you choose blue pill or red pill.
You got to get the shades and the whole suit.
The Morpheus look. You could pull it off, Bobby. We believe in you.
Carnivorpheus, baby.
There we go.
Oh yeah.
You just
So,
put it
yeah.
on your, yeah.
So what other thoughts do you guys have? I mean, okay, so we kind of did a pretty good, dissection.
Amos hasn't given his take quite yet, so.
Oh yeah, have you not done your statement?
No. I don't have anything to add.
He just
though.
agrees with me. We can move on.
No, I mean, this guy, I remember this guy when he first came out. He also did another video called Sexual Healing. You guys remember that one? Did you guys ever see that one? It was one about basically like just porn, like porn addiction or something. But just real quick on that guy, actually, because he kind of faded out. Like, you know, obviously he had his viral moment. Everyone was posting this video. Literally everyone, like every church I ever heard of was posting this video, like, you know, ooh, for the sermon. And I'm like watching this, and later on, I think what happened was he kind of had a Rob Bell moment. Do you guys know who Rob Bell is?
Yeah.
Yeah, what moment did he have?
He had a Rob Bell moment where Rob Bell put out the book Love Wins, basically
Yeah.
questioning the idea of heaven and hell, and everyone freaked out and was like, you're gonna, Rob Bell is a heretic and going to hell or something. So this guy, what he did was he put out a video questioning the rapture.
Oh,
Like he did
Spicy.
he did a whole thing where he was breaking it down. He was like, the rapture, like the theology is only like 200 years old, and it's this new thing, and everyone thinks it's like we've always believed this. It was kind of interpreted a certain way, and he's kind of like breaks down like the bit of the psychology behind it, and like it's kind of like an escapist idea, like kind of the screw the world. I just want to. Because every year now, it's like, COVID is a sign of the times. I remember when like 2020 was supposed to be the year when the rapture happened.
Remember 2012? Was
It was
the end of the world?
2012,
2000.
Yeah. And
1913 if you're a KW.
Ooh. Smooth score.
but so this guy, definitely had his moments and stuff, but so it's good to kind of see these people progress. But I like what Bobby was pointing out, kind of the anti-religious in the other direction. Because I've actually encountered a lot of these people and got in a little trouble because I got just too careless with like, I'm just gonna call them out on Facebook, like, oh, look at me, I'm just so not religious, I'm just so free, and just I don't go to church and I don't read the Bible, and it wasn't like I was advocating for one thing or the other. It was just like people were like would write post after post after post, writing, just talking about how free they are, and and they would like almost complain, yeah, I really hated the gay people back then, but now I'm just so free, and I'm like you're straining to tell me how free you are. Like
Josh Harris did. We were just talking about him last week. He went LGBTQ friendly. He went, he really went all out on that apology tour.
Yeah, and it's so you look at all this, and people get too edgy. They get too like, the favorite Christian word, relevant. That they kind of lose track of the point. And I think for the most part, like you can live relatively normal. If people think, they keep saying, we're in the world, we're not of the world, and all this stuff. And it's like, for the most part, like I think a Christian is my take, not like every Christian is this way, but for the most part, a Christian should be able to walk into just about any social situation and be cool enough that people are not like getting the creeps by you being there. Because it's like, you got guys that just go, you got these Christians that go places and it's either one way or another. So it's a guy that's enjoying himself way too much because of how free he is, or so uptight that he can't enjoy a single thing and he's judgmental, versus guys that are in there that are totally not religious, that are just like, oh, okay, we're just chilling out. We're just hanging out, having a drink, whatever. I mean, Brooke knows about this story, but we had a friend that disclosed this whole story where he went with some bosses to a strip club, and he sat down to eat, and he had a full-on conversation with the strippers, like just a very compassionate, caring, like he somehow could like see the girl dancing, like, oh, see that she had passion for dancing, separate from trying to just make a buck and do her thing for it. But he just had this attitude where he could be fully comfortable, not be some weirdo. And his bosses knew he was a Christian. They were kind of throwing money at the strippers, like, get him, really mess him up or whatever. And he was just fine there. And this caused quite an uproar where he shared this story. If you remember, Brooke.
Yeah, I do. Broke the conference.
Dude, that was like the first break among the many.
Oh, there were several on that conference.
I mean, there was one. Yeah, we had a whole guy talking about going to a strip club, and then there was like some couple that was there from a very religious part of the world that was like freaking out, like, how could you have someone speak on this? All sorts of stuff. Anyways, not to get too much into that, but you get this like these videos that try to be so relevant that they're completely irrelevant. Mm-hmm. Like the guy is trying to rhyme and rap so well that I'm like, that becomes almost like the equivalent of like I don't know what the term. It's kind of like when you watch like your SJW TV shows, they really shove that in your face. It's like that, but the Christian version. It's like Christian virtue signaling in your face. So it's just like, it's not spiritual. Like now, if a guy like, but then I see videos, there's actual videos of like guys who do like high quality productions, and they're totally normal. They're talking about real things. They're talking about things that actually happened to them. They're not trying to rhyme. They just kind of give you this profound message through something so simple. And you're like, oh, okay, that was pretty good.
To the defense of the guy who made this video, though, because I was checking him out, before the show. I think he's mellowed out a little bit. I think he's grown up.
Quite a bit, yeah.
So I don't know if he's still like that,
But I mean, like, for example, like I was talking about videos that are like high quality, pretty like relatable stuff. Like, again, back to this guy, Rob Bell. He did a series, I think it was called Numa. And you could buy them all over like churches and stuff before he obviously became the heretic. Like every church, because he made his messages so relatable and so broad that like most denominations could just, oh, okay, here's a video about God's love. Here's a video about, being a child of God, things like that. And he would just be talking about like going on a hike with his daughter. Like that's all he talked about, and somehow made a whole spiritual lesson about that. He's not sitting there in front of a cathedral trying to rap about, rap like he's the coolest thing or whatever. So,
yeah. I mean, what you were talking about before of like the whole when you get two of that spiritual subjective half, and you don't have the community behind it, that's when things start getting crazy, right? And you were kind of relating it to the SJW crowd and the feminist crowd too, and like that's something exactly I was thinking too, because when you're doing the whole, so first of all, how I define religion is the community aspect of the spiritual journey, right? So the spirituality is relatively individualistic. The religion is when you have groups, right? That's how I personally describe it. And the problem is the more spiritual and wound up in your head and all these deep thoughts and prayers, but if you don't have any accountability with community, that stuff goes cray pretty fast, right? You need some kind of, not necessarily buffering, but filtering of like your ideas, because humans can think of pretty crazy stuff when they're by themselves in a closet or locked in a house all day because the government told you to, right? If you if you're not able to like open and discuss and be with the public and be with other Christians and bounce ideas off each other as almost a filtering mechanism of how crazy your mind is going to go completely by itself, just thinking on its own. You know what I mean? I don't know if you guys can relate to that too, but have you ever been researching something on your own and going deeper and deeper in, and then you try to share it with someone and they completely obliterate you because you didn't totally think of a totally another perspective? You know what I mean? You're like, oh, wow, I didn't think of that. Thanks for the gut check, right? And I think that's where the whole feminist SJW part, and also these kind of like spiritual raps, is because these are usually guys just thinking in their head of like what's cool to say and how do I really feel, but they're not getting fact checked, right? So
exactly.
Yeah.
It's like I've got a good boxer friend here in Thailand. He was a champion Australian boxer, really cool dude. And he would tell me the worst thing you can do. He said the biggest mistake that boxers make is they train to fight instead of fight to train. In other words, you pick up all your bad habits when nobody's punching back at you. Like the worst way you could train to box is to just hit a punching bag for hours a day or hit one of those punching bobs because nobody's punching back at you. So you're getting a false sense of what it's like to actually box. Or like I've got a buddy in the military that says the worst way to learn how to shoot is when nobody else is shooting back at you. Like that doesn't really teach you what it's like. So I kind of agree with what you guys are saying. It's almost like it's in their head. They don't have anybody to, like you guys said, just refute them and say, hey, well, did you think of this? And it just totally, like, I'll give you guys a quick example of that. So I was proud of this little argument that I concocted for years. And I used to use it to actually like get a lot of people. I used to call it the one hit acquitter, because so when I would talk to atheists, I would say, so you believe in empiricism, where basically anything that can't be measured or weighed or microscoped or that you don't believe exists. So I would say, and a lot of people will say love, well, love, you can't weigh love, you can't measure love. One that I thought of is okay, well, think of the human brain. It's a 3-pound organ of fat. And by the time an 80-year-old man has a much larger memory bank than a newborn child, right? In other words, he accumulates thousands of memories over a lifetime, millions of pieces of knowledge, thousands of words, thousands of all the stuff that's stored in his brain, right? Yet his brain doesn't get any heavier. So I'm like, if you believe that the only things that exist are things that can be weighed and measured, what about consciousness? Our consciousness increases as we age, as we grow through experience, as we acquire memories. And how come your brain doesn't get heavier every day? And I used to use that, and a lot of people say, "Oh, that's a great point. There's no comeback for it." And then another time, I'm hanging out with one of my Catholic buddies. He's actually like a Catholic writer, and I hit him with that. And literally all he said was, "Well, how do you explain computer hard drives then?" I'm like, "Damn it, man."
Yeah.
The one punch man, right to your logic.
Okay, I was waiting for that. I was like, wait, did Bonnie really believe this? Yeah, Brooke and I are like, what? Do you really believe this?
Younger years.
Yeah, Christian apologists are interesting. Like and that's the whole thing. You get this whole study of how to convince someone of something. I saw this. Well, that'll probably be a little off topic. Like people that are so on, like I think there's something about like the thought process you go to when you start with trying to prove something. You can't really think any other way. So if your premise is, I want to disprove atheism, instead of taking the stance of, what do atheists believe? What do I believe? Where can we come to some sort of agreement? Where do we agree on things? Where do we disagree on things? How does the atheist define God? How do I define God? Well, how does he define religion, spirituality? What does that mean? Instead, people kind of attack it from, okay, Christian apologist class. Apologetics, I should say. Wrong word. $10 words today. Lots of money. With apologetics, how do you, it's like the focus is mainly how do you prove God exists, or how do you tell, how do you get faith? Yeah, how do you defend the faith? And it's like, that's not how you really like do it. Like the best way to defend the faith is usually through some form of a relationship or actions that show what's behind the faith, not necessarily what the faith is. You're sitting there defending this faith, you're defending a house that no one knows what's inside of.
Right. Yeah. What's that old famous quote? It's like, at all times preach the gospel, but only if necessary use words.
Use words.
Yeah.
I think that was C.S. Lewis, actually.
Yeah.
To the point that
ancient
that
Bible
Amos
scholar, right?
What Amos was pointing to, I love what you were saying, and that actually brings me into a point about how sometimes we go with the wrong objective. So my objective is never to argue. Like as I've explained before, I have conviction, but I could be wrong. Cool, not a big deal. But trying to understand a perspective is very interesting. But many times we have confirmation bias, and we will read that into our beliefs, and we will substantiate a belief. So, for instance, in the Orthodox Church, if ever you get the chance to read McDowell, he did the history of the Eucharist, and if you look, and anybody who do the communion, bread and wine, you could look at every branch of the church, and they all do it differently. In fact, the first schism between East and West was over an issue of communion, whether to use leavened bread or unleavened bread and stuff like that. It didn't break the church, but that was the beginnings of it. But every church to this day still does it differently. Now, a lot of the ceremony and stuff like that, the East and the West have it. The East and the Roman Church have it very similar, but the Eastern Church waters down the wine. And that was obviously not in the Last Supper. The Last Supper doesn't talk about the watering down of the wine. It's a church tradition. And the reason that happened is because in the agape feast that the early church used to do, people used to get drunk, right? People would just drink the wine and they'd get drunk. So some Karens showed up. Yeah, enamored for so some Karens showed up, didn't like that, and started watering down the wine, right? And that became a tradition. And the East kept it. To this day, they still do it. But instead of, they don't point to that. They point to the fact that when Jesus was pierced on the cross, it was blood and water that came out. So they justify it that way. But that wasn't, we don't pull the communion from the crucifixion. We pull it from the Last Supper. But even the Protestants today, they don't even use wine in many of the churches. They use grapefruit juice or some other kind of juice.
Sponsored by Welch's.
Yeah.
And then Welch's was a Methodist preacher.
He was a Methodist
wanted
preacher.
To create a non-fermented grape juice. Yeah.
He invented pasteurization specifically to keep grapes from being fermented. So that's the whole religious mindset, right? Why? Because
don't even get me started on Quaker Oats.
But that's exactly it, is that they're reading all of this stuff into it. And I mean, again, it's not even real differences. At the end of the day, it really doesn't matter, right? It's a common thread that's shown throughout the entire church. And we have different traditions built around it. And God could use anything. People get healed in the Catholic Church from communion. Like in the Protestant Church, they have miracles. God is not that small at the end of the day. But we run the risk of being myopic in our view and thinking like, this is it. Like, this is how we view it. And, I can now look back in the Bible and support my view, selectively and whatever. And that's exactly as Corey was saying about, if you don't have that community, but you can't really bounce these ideas off of. The only caveat to that, I would say, is the Apostle Paul. Because the Apostle Paul, he got revelation by himself.
Yeah.
Now, he did eventually go back and challenge it with the 12, Peter and everybody else and stuff. But he did accumulate a lot on his own before he went back and had those discussions. But yeah. I think that's good.
And the only caveat I would say to what you said, Brooke, which I agree with most of, is the notion of, wow, it just completely left my mind, like right before I was about to say it. That's so weird.
It'll come to you. It'll come to you.
The Lord works in mysterious ways.
He does.
Oh, I was going to say real quick, I probably got to go. I'm going to go commit idolatry and give my offerings to the porcelain throne. So I got to go.
Oh, gosh.
But,
feel better, our friend. Come on.
Yeah.
Feel better.
Say that again? Oh, yeah. Yeah. You guys have a good one.
We got to pray over him.
Thank you. Oh, is it Tic Tacs? That's a good snack. All right. Peace, guys.
Oh, here's what I was going to say, Brooke. It came back to me.
Man. Yeah.
The only caveat I'd say to what you said is the notion that it doesn't matter. Like everybody has their own version of communion. I believe in ordinary grace, like the ordinary means of grace that God established.
Yes.
That he prefers. And then there's extraordinary grace. Obviously, we know that God doesn't chain himself to the sacraments. He doesn't chain himself to the ordinary grace. That's why he can use, and that, I think that ties in well with our topic, because that is one of the critiques, and I even hate to call them sides, but that is one of the critiques that the spiritual side has against the religious side. Is the spiritual side accuses the religious side of, hey, you're handcuffing God, you're putting him in a box, you're restricting him to the sacraments, these rituals.
Wow.
And then you got the religious side accusing the spiritual side of doing the opposite. They're saying, well, you need the sacraments. You can't just say mama sama makusa and have a relationship with Jesus.
Oh, that's a lake here in Minnesota. We actually have a lake in Minnesota that got renamed to a Native American name for political reasons.
Really?
It's called Bede Madaska, literally.
I thought you were either going to say Lake Minnetonka, which is where Prince lived, or Prince's rival.
It's near that lake.
Well, I actually got his rival Michael Jackson from "Want to Be Starting Something."
Yes, exactly.
I'm saying Masama Makusa, but yeah, I mean, but that is how the two sides see each other. Like, you need the sacraments, we don't need the sacraments. Again, I believe that religion and spirituality can coexist. I really do. I don't see them as mutually exclusive. I do think that they're different.
I agree.
When I prayed today, I was walking today and I was talking to Jesus today. I was telling him what's on my mind. I was thinking about how much I loved him. Okay. That was a spiritual experience. Okay.
Absolutely.
But that's not going to fulfill my Sunday obligation as a Catholic. I have to go to mass, so that's how I believe that they can coexist. I don't believe it's Catholic. I'm a both and guy. I'm not an either or guy. So
Right. I get that, but going to mass is a spiritual fulfillment or a religious fulfillment?
to me, it's both.
Okay. So
It's
if you
both.
couldn't go to mass,
What would
you
happen?
Yeah, what you just say you wouldn't be fulfilled, but
Well-
what if you didn't go to mass? What would that mean to you?
Well, I mean, to be blunt, if without grave reason, it'd be a mortal sin because it's a direct violation of the third commandment to keep holy the Sabbath, which is a religious law that's still binding.
But the law's been fulfilled.
Well,
It has,
yeah.
but that's not the same as being done away with. It's just been
Okay.
elevated.
Here, so not to, I actually just, so this is kind of how I see it, because I've heard people, I've talked to people that will debate this. So, I signed a contract with you for you to provide a service for $100, and the service is exchanged, $100. We signed a contract. Now I put it away for reference, whether it's for taxes, legal purposes. But if you come to me again, we have to drop a new contract. That contract is like you can't use that contract again because it's already been fulfilled.
Yep.
All the conditions are met. It's done. But why do I have to keep following that contract when it's already done?
That's a good point. Now, here's what I would say to that. And again, every analogy has a flaw in it. Even my comeback analogy will have a flaw in it. But let's say, to use your example, I would say that, let's say that it was written in the contract that this is a preliminary contract and that there's a clause in the contract that says when these conditions are met, it's going to evolve into an entirely new contract.
What is your scriptural basis for that?
No. Let him finish the analogy first.
Okay.
Well, firstly, we both believe that there's old and new covenants. So the fact that there's a new covenant means that there is that think of it like this. If you believe that the old law was done away with in the absolute, which I do believe it is in that sense, like I'm not, I had pork and butter today, like that. God was not pleased with that I mixed those two. Like now to a Jewish conscience, they couldn't dream of doing that. But so that old law has passed. Okay, that old law has been fulfilled. But even in the old law, there were provisions for a future covenant that would come that would supersede the old covenant. And that new covenant is binding. It's just that they're two different laws. So here's an example. All throughout the New Testament, we hear about the law of Moses, the law of Moses, the law of Moses. In two different places, 1 Corinthians 9:21 and Galatians 6, verse 2, St. Paul makes very interesting reference to what he calls the law of Christ, where he pits the law of Moses against the law of Christ. And I do believe that the law of Christ superseded the law of Moses. The law of Moses actually paved the way for the law of Christ.
Right.
But the law of Christ is binding on us. Like it is a binding law. So that's, to me, that's where the religion comes in. When I say religion, I'm not talking about Torah. Like if you look in Romans 3:28, when Paul said that a man is justified by works by faith apart from the works of the law, before Luther added the word alone in the German translation, if you look at the actual context of it, the verse right after that said, is God the God of the Jews only? Is he not also the God of the Gentiles? So when Paul said that we're free, that when Paul's basically saying that the law is no more, you could actually use the word Torah interchangeable with law, that we're justified by works, by faith apart from the works of the Torah. But there are works of the new law that are required. Baptism, to enter into the new covenant, you have to be baptized. That's the circumcision of the Spirit, Paul says in Colossians 2:11. He literally calls it the circumcision of Christ.
No, baptism wasn't. He didn't say baptism was the circumcision of Christ. He said you have been circumcised. It's the circumcision of the heart.
Exactly.
So we won't conflate baptism with that. But so we're opening some huge.
We are.
You know what's really interesting? A Catholic that can quote scripture.
Oh, I love scripture.
Oh no, don't worry. I get lots of those in the discussion, which is great. So okay, Amos, did you finish your point?
Well, he's made his point, I think, pretty well. But I'll let you take it from there.
I understand the idea that yes, of course there are two ways, but we were never included in the first law. Gentiles, unless you have Jewish heritage, you were never included in the first law. So to the Jews, it was two laws. There was the Mosaic economy, and then there's the new covenant. For the Gentiles, we were never in the first law. We were given one law, one covenant, which is the new covenant. And this is where I think most of the church is confused, because they're trying to marry the old and the new. Now, we may disagree a little bit about when the new actually begins. So again, the Sermon on the Mount, I still consider that old covenant. Jesus operated under the old covenant. He was fulfilling the requirements of the law. Everything he said and did was in the confines of the law, including verses out of Deuteronomy that said you cannot add anything to the law, neither can you take away anything from the law. So everything he said to fulfill the law was within the confines of the law. Jesus preaching to the Jews, crucified, he had his 12. They went out for 3.5 years, but God chose somebody completely different to speak to the Gentiles. Somebody who had no affiliation with Jesus in the beginning, which is, of course, the Apostle Paul. And Paul and Peter disagreed. Paul had to teach Peter what the new covenant was, which is, James, the half-brother of Jesus, when Paul and him had their confrontation, it was this very argument. James is there boasting. It's like, look at all these people, the Jews are coming in. They're zealous for the law. And Paul immediately goes and writes the book of Galatians, shutting down this idea that the two can actually coexist. So while I respect your position, the two cannot coexist. I think they're, pulling out the 10 commandments from the rest of the law, then anybody could pull out anything. They could pull out circumcision because it wasn't included in the original, the 600 laws. You could pull out tithing. You can pull and select all these things. But when James writes about it, he says, no, it's the entirety. James says in James 2:10, if you do not keep all, like every commandment, and you slip in one, just one thing, you're guilty of all. So as you say, yes, all right, you want to go by the 10 commandments? You can't. You have to go by all, including the dietary laws. It's all or nothing. That's James.
I would push back on your interpretation, and here's why. And by the way, guys, I love these. We're being scholars.
Me too. It's nothing antagonistic, bro. This is great.
Absolutely, man. So here, and it's best for the viewers, because you guys it's the customer that always benefits from the healthy competition.
Yes, our happy viewers.
But my thing is this, guys. I partially agree with what you said, Brooke. Here's where we depart, though. Because from the Catholic biblical worldview, we divided the old law into 3 parts. There are verses in Deuteronomy that says these laws shall be binding forever, that they would never be done away with. So, like, for example, in Romans chapter 7, St. Paul made a very interesting statement, and Aquinas really, really went into this in the Summa, in its section on law, where St. Paul said that the law is good, just, and holy. There were 3 different ways that he described the law: good, just, and holy. He said that each of those descriptions corresponded with different aspects of the law. So think of the law like a 3-legged footstool, right?
Yeah.
So the 3-legged footstool is you have the moral law, you have the civil law, and you have the ceremonial law. So keeping the moral law makes you good. Keeping the 10 commandments, not lying, cheating, stealing, killing, committing adultery, that makes you good. And those are forever binding, okay? So that's the moral law. That's the part.
Why do we say it's forever binding?
I don't have the verse off the top of my head, but there were certain instances where God said that they would be for forever. Like, and if you think about it, when did the requirement to not kill ever end? Like, it's still wrong to kill. It's like all the 10 commandments are still there.
I'll challenge you on that. Did God not command Abraham to kill his son?
Okay, so I probably should have used a different word then. There's even people who distinguish between kill and murder. There's a difference. When it says thou shalt not kill, it really means thou shalt not murder.
Okay.
But not all killing is murder. All murder is killing, but not all killing is murder. So there's argue that.
Right. Same. The question still stands.
God is not bound by his own laws. So sometimes he can bend the law, and if you have God's authority to bend his own law, like look at Acts chapter 10, right?
I completely agree.
Yeah. So
it shows that the law. Yes, while I know the argument it's for us. The law is for us in that sense, and it doesn't bind God. Yeah, that's true. Actually, it does bind God, because it was a covenant between the two parties. God was bound to the law just as Israel was bound to the law. So that if God was not a covenant keeper, we could never trust him, right? That was the whole premise of the covenant, is that he was their blesser and curser. So he was bound to the law as well.
The
That's why he
Israelites
hated it.
demanded the law, didn't they?
Yes.
Did
the
Abraham-
Israelites demanded the law.
But did Abraham end up killing Isaac though? Like, how do we know it wasn't just a test of faith?
Right. That, completely. Yeah, of course. Nobody knows the mind of God, but up until that point, first of all, there was no law. For those who didn't know, when Abraham was there. So that is a whole other story on that.
Yeah.
The same thing about Noah and the flood. Yeah, a lot of people died and all that kind of stuff. But that's a different point of view, in the sense, the law in itself did not just bind Israel and their behavior; it also bound God, because it was, "I will be your God." I'm sorry. If you obey, I will bless. If you disobey, I will curse. That was God's responsibility, and also He was their protector and stuff like that. So when it comes to the law, we can't make that distinction and just say, "Well, no, God is not bound to these things." He had His part; Israel had their part. But yeah, continue.
Well, but again, the reason I don't agree with that is because look at the laws of nature, right? God supersedes those with supernatural miracles. He authored those laws, yet he breaks those laws for his divine purposes. So I believe that he has the power to set aside the law in certain circumstances if he deems it fit. But just to finish up my point real quick. So you have the moral law, which consists of the 10 commandments. That's what makes you good by keeping those. Then you have the civil law, which is between man and man. That's what makes you just, because the virtue of justice renders to your neighbor his due, right? His livestock, his, don't sleep with his wife and all that kind of stuff. And then you have the ceremonial law, and that's what made them holy. So that's where that good, just, and holy thing that Aquinas made that distinction. As far, I think two of those were done away with, the ceremonial law and the old civil law. I agree, those were done away with, but the moral law was here to stay. And we probably don't agree on that, but that's my Catholic.
James would disagree, because there's nowhere you could ask the Jews today. Yes, they categorize it, but it's all you got to have the whole picture. And again, James 2:10. You can keep the whole law, and if you're guilty in one part, you're guilty of all. And that's in the New Testament. So,
but law and Torah, again, like in Romans 3:28, law and Torah could be used interchangeably if you read it in the proper context. So he could have said that about the Torah. That could be argued too.
Yeah, fine, but it still stands. Even if you want to say it as the Torah, it would include all the books of the law, which would include the 613 laws. Meaning you can't just pull out Abraham's account and say, well, this is it. You got to take the whole thing. So no matter what, you can't take bits and pieces of the law. That is, people do it. So I believe there's a higher law, which is what you described as the law of Christ. So why, as you said, Paul is kind of pitting the old covenant against the law of Christ, the law of Moses versus the law of Christ. What is the law of Christ? It's the law of faith. It is, Christ is in me. You have now been joined to Christ. Walk by faith. Walk by faith in the Christ is living through me. So Paul would always make account like, I'm dead. It is no longer I that live, but Christ that lives through me. So we have pulling it out of, what is it? In the Old Testament, it talks about writing the laws on the heart. I can't remember exactly where it is. So the Old Covenant was, external laws, and we still have external laws today, but God's plan was internal laws. He's given us the Holy Spirit and all these things, and the Christ in us, that directs our path. And I think that's the difference. If somebody truly believed in the Christ in them, they don't need laws. They don't need somebody outside of them to tell them. While they're immature believers, that's what the church is for. We teach them to draw on the Christ in them until they're mature and they can trust in it. And then you don't need laws, because you've got, that kind of thing.
Yeah. We might agree on that. I just think we articulate it differently, because Aquinas, being in the West, he contrasted the old law as exterior, but the new law is internal. He said that the new law is the law of grace, and that is internal. But he did say that the new law could also be found in certain parts of Scripture, certain externals. But at its heart, it's the grace of the Holy Spirit. So I think we agree on that.
Yeah, definitely. The question is, do we need the external? That's the question. This is where the whole thing about the sacraments and the traditions. So that would be an interesting, we could do a show on that, I'm sure.
Absolutely. Because there's been people that have talked about works of the old law and works of the new law, like sacraments, baptism, that kind of thing. So Amos, what you got for us, man?
Yeah, like what? I was just doing a little bit of work. Sorry. But no, I have to. I mean, I agree with Brooke on because he and I've talked a lot about this. But another way I look at it is kind of like imagine. We talked about contracts and such, and then the difference between the law of the Jews and then, of course, for us Gentiles, we only had the one covenant. Jews get two of them. I kind of look at it like this too. Imagining kind of when, so in the beginnings of the U.S., when the states were forming, you had territories that through a contract, basically, we made a purchased the land, then it gained statehood. It was part of the country. Whatever it was before ceases to be through a fulfillment of a contract. Now the land is still there, the foundation of the the ground, everything is still there, but it's a different place with different laws, different everything. Those Native Americans are now depending upon, obviously, not to get into that history, but the people who were there are now Americans because they're on American soil right now, naturalization and all that. So that's kind of how I see it. Is like there's because when I've talked about this again with a lot of specifically with Catholics, is they'll say the whole difference between fulfillment, destroying the law, and it's like, yeah, well, fulfillment just I stick that that's the only way it makes sense to me is if it's fulfilled. Therefore, you can still reference it, you can still have it for legal purposes to kind of like show, hey, this is already let's just say in some sort of in a metaphor, you could say like, well, here's the contract that's signed in Jesus's blood. You can't really bring it back. You can't use this law against me anymore. The law has already been fulfilled. And then, of course, there's the other aspect of he did it on our behalf. We are now through him. Everything is already fulfilled. There's no, what is it? Sin isn't really there. I mean, sin is sin. Sin is a thing you still do. The way I always thought about sin when I was growing up was like, here's your heart, and you had a little black spot.
Is it cancer?
And each sin you committed was like an extra black spot. And then you pray and Jesus forgives you, and then it's like all clean. But then when I learned about grace and then the fulfillment of the old covenant, and now we're part of the new covenant, we're saved by grace, not by our own works. And then, of course, we talk about like past, present, and future sins are all forgiven, because forgiveness can't just be temporal or conditional. It's either is all the time or none of the time. You have a heart that's clean all the time. This, heart that is not sinful. No spots. But it might beat a little irregularly if you do something wrong. You do something that is sinful. Everything is permissible, but not all things are beneficial. So you're sitting there not taking care of your heart. You're doing stupid stuff. You're jerking off all day. You're eating like crap.
How did you know?
Exactly. But that's the difference that I've always sought. So I've never really. That's just the change. We all have our little like beliefs when we grow up that like kind of weird. Like oh, I got a heart that's got like black spots all over it. But then of course, I guess I don't quite understand, not being on the other side of this belief, how to really like, what is this clinging to the law religiously?
Well, I cling to the law of Christ. So for me as a Catholic, clinging to the law of Christ is, like I said, receiving sacraments, which, by the way, the sacraments are God's works, not ours. One analogy I've always used for my RCIA students, which is this class, if you want to become Catholic, you spend 9 months in the womb of the church learning about Catholicism, and you join the church on Easter Sunday. And one analogy I've always used, to explain baptism, for example, like If there's a little kid outside playing, and this ties in perfectly with the theme of religion or spirituality, is baptism religious or spiritual? Again, I think it's both. But if there's a kid playing outside and he falls into a dirty ditch, he's covered in mud, right? And his mom comes out, she picks him up, runs some bath water, puts some soaps and suds in there, takes his clothes off, scrubs him down very thoroughly, washes all that dirt off of him. Who's working, the kid or the mom? I mean, it's the mom's doing all the work. She's the one cleaning him, purifying him. So the sacraments are God's works. They draw their power from the cross. Our work is to participate in them, to receive them. But they're not just like these things that we're just, and that, I guess that's what I love about being religious, is that I actually think it's easier to be religious than spiritual. And I'll tell you why. Because when you're spiritual, sometimes, and I'm not saying all the time, but sometimes if all you have is spirituality, like a vague, generic, aimless kind of a spirituality that's not tied to something infallible and unchangeable, what ends up happening is you end up abandoning it. And I know lots of people that this has happened to. Whereas when you have that steady religion, it's consistent. No matter how you're feeling, you could feel depressed, you could feel tired, you could feel lonely, angry, you name it. There's times I'll go to mass, I literally just show up and plop myself down in the pew because I know that God is there doing all the work. I'm just there to receive. And that is one of the benefits of religion. Like when I go to Eucharistic, I'll just plop down in front of the sacrament.
Right.
You know?
So here's a question for you. Why do you have to go to church to receive?
Because unless you eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood, you have no life in you. And there's a very specific way that Jesus said to do that, which is to receive his body and blood. And you can only do that at church.
But that's already been completed, though, isn't it?
No, it has been completed, but it's represented, not represented, but represented in the holy sacrifice of the Mass. It's renewed.
Right. This you really should. I'll send you the link for the book on the Eucharist.
Yeah, I think I like that, but I'd like it. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll see if you've read it and stuff like that. It's Church of England guy, Irish fellow, really cool. And you watch the evolution of the Eucharist. So I'll put it to you like this: in the early church, do you know what the Didache is?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the Didache.
Didache. I don't even know.
However, I think it's Didache. But however,
Eucharist.
So anybody doesn't know, it was a book that was given to the Jews to how to interact with these new Gentiles that were coming into the church and stuff like that, and they kind of outlaid some of the early church practices. Here's the problem with that, in the sense the first church was, again, it was a house meeting and they had a meal. So the Eucharist was a meal, right? And there was a table, and that was kind of the symbol of the church for the first 200 years was a table. Until around the 200s, the pagans like, where's your altar? It's like, well, we don't have an altar, we have a table. Today we have an altar. I don't know how we jump. That is religion. Like, how did we go from a table that's welcoming to a separated sacred altar? You know, this kind of thing. That's a whole other discussion.
How did we go from no book for a few hundred years to a book?
Well, that was my next point, is that the Bible didn't produce the church produced the Bible. The church pre-existed the actual canon of Bible that we have here. That's actually an Eastern Orthodox thing. So to put it this way, is a lot of the things that we think are absolutely essential, I always take it back to the first century. And I say, well, what did the first century have? Because obviously the stoning of Stephen. Stephen, we know, went to heaven because he actually saw it. He saw the heavens open, the Lord standing, and he went. So I said, okay, well, what did Stephen believe? Well, he was a Jew. He believed that Jesus was the Son of God. That's about all we know. Now we could try and put a lot of more other things into it, but that's really all we know. Now, I mean, we may differ a little bit on the idea of baptism, because again, we see a distinction between what happened, what was requirement for the Jews versus the Gentiles. So Acts chapter 2 and chapter 3, Peter speaking to the Jews says, yeah, how do we enter into this new covenant? He says, believe and be baptized for the forgiveness of sins. And that's how the Jews would enter the covenant. But we see the reverse when it came to the Gentiles. When Peter's preaching to the Gentiles in the house of Cornelius, the Holy Spirit falls on them first. They're accepted first then they are baptized. And that is a distinction, I mean, that, again, that's a whole other thing.
Yeah.
So the linchpin for all of them, for Stephen, the Jews, the house of Cornelius, even the Ethiopian eunuch, who had none of the New Testament writings. He was a Jewish pilgrim. He was baptized and he was sent back with the Old Testament. That's all he had. He never, we don't know if he ever got the writings of Paul, or he wouldn't have believed any of the things that we probably believe today. All he had was faith that Jesus was the Son of God. And that seemed to be suffice. So, yeah.
Yeah. And before we open it up, because I'd like somebody to call in. The thing is see, to me, religion is, I look at the early church, like I look at the church of the book of Acts as the acorn. Because that's what it was. But the oak tree is inside the acorn. It just hasn't fully flourished yet. So, of course, the church of today is not going to look like the church of the book of Acts. It evolved over time, but it's still the same entity. It's just grown. Like, I'm the same person I was when I was a zygote, an embryo, a newborn, a toddler, a teenager. Yes. But obviously now I'm a man, but I'm still Bobby. So
yeah, that's 100% human, but now you're an adult.
Exactly. Right. So that's how I would see that seeming gap between, man, how do we go from the love feast at Priscilla's house to, mass at Shrine of the Little Flower in Royal Oak? Like, yeah. To me, that's what explains that jump. And a good church father that you probably know, Brooke, that you'd really like, that it was almost like his charism, his gimmick, as they would say in the pro wrestling world, is St. Vincent of Lérins. And he was very big on the development of doctrine. And St. Henry Newman, John Henry Newman, wrote a lot on the development of doctrine. But sometimes doctrine and practice will develop so much, and it will evolve so much from its primitive form that it almost seems like it changes, but it doesn't change. It just grows and evolves. So that's kind of how I see those differences.
I would agree with that if it actually grows and evolves. But if the whole point of you being an embryo is you're 100% human, and no course upon your lifespan are you not going to be 100% human. But if you start off as one thing and then that thing is no longer present, so we go from a table, an open table, to a sacred altar where only certain clergymen or whatever the case is can actually go there, you've lost the foundation of the table. The whole the point of the table was that it was inviting. So that's not an evolution, that's a destruction. If it evolves, the table gets bigger, and you can add to the table, but you can't remove the table and suddenly make it, the lay people can't sit at the table. That's not the same thing as an evolution of a doctrine.
Well, to me it is, and the reason why is because that's where the binding and loosing power of the church comes in. Like Jesus he gave the church authority to bind and loose and things like that, to change, not to change doctrine, but to change discipline, to change, like priestly celibacy. A lot of people don't know in the Latin Rite, priestly celibacy didn't come around till I think the 11th century. Right. But that's a practice, not a doctrine. So that is subject to change.
It's a tradition. Yeah, that is a tradition. I'm not sure if that's because, again, the ecclesia is a gathering of people. So when Jesus says church, it's ecclesia. It's people. And I disagree with this even in the Orthodox Church, because this is what led to the destruction of Jerusalem, was the idea that the Pharisees and the Sadducees had exclusive rights to interpret the scriptures and tell the people what they were doing. I think we make that same mistake today. I don't see where the church has the power to do that, because it does say Christ will build his church. It doesn't say that we will change the architecture. So, I mean, yeah. If you have something on that, I'd be interested to read it. I don't know. Sure. Yeah. The Orthodox Church does it too, but I don't know where this, just because of centuries of history. There's no grounds for it.
Yeah. Amazing mentor. You've had some pretty interesting comments here. I sense fear in you, Bobby. A fear that comforts in keeping rules, something familiar from dark times in your past, but it's not freedom. Well, while I appreciate the YouTube psychoanalysis, my past, I'll tell you this, amazing mentor, and I appreciate your feedback. My past would have been a lot darker were it not for the rules that I've kept. If I didn't keep certain rules, I'd have abortions in my past that I would have been, that would have been on my conscience. Let's say I fornicated with a woman, I got her pregnant, and I wanted to have the baby, but she didn't want to have the baby. That would have been a very dark past because I would have had no legal say in that. So my past would have been a lot darker were it not for those rules. But I do appreciate your care and concern. Feel free to call in, guys. We got about 9 minutes left. We're coming up on a hard 1 week break in about 9 minutes.
Oh, nice.
Tom Bombadil brings up a good point. Does God break rule? Oh, what's that?
You guys have your 10K rum show coming up in 10 minutes, right?
No.
But no, like 40 minutes or so.
40 minutes.
Yeah. Sorry. Tom Bombadil brings up a good point. Does God break rules for alphas and make rules for betas? Old Covenant is beta, man.
Hey, Tom, I think a better way to ask that is, does God break rules for alphas or make rules for alphas and break them for omegas?
Well, it's Aleph and Tav, but yeah. That's it. I don't think. No, hold on. Let's think.
Oh, you know what? Yeah, I'm sorry. I got to include the link in here, guys, so our people can call in.
Oh, yeah, there you go. Yeah, Tom will probably jump in.
Yeah. Still getting used to this thing, guys. How do I shoot? I hate to ask you guys these tutor questions on person.
You click share, go down to the invite or share thing in the bottom. See the invite.
Duh.
It gives you the link.
You know what? I'm thinking I had to send out the YouTube link. All right, here we go.
There we go.
All right, guys, here's the link. Feel free to join us. We've got about 8 minutes left. So come on in if you want to join us.
Excellent. Yeah, this is fun, man. I enjoy this for Sunday.
Now, remember, when you start seeing people pop up on the bottom there, you have to add them in.
Yeah, you got to add them to the stream when they show up.
Yeah.
That's fine.
All these freaking rules of StreamYard. Why can't they just come in? Why do I have to click to let them in? All these rules.
Because then anyone could come in. You see how Rich has to run the show. He's got tons of people coming in. He's got to make sure they,
He's excluding people now. Not very table-ish, not very open table.
Hey, Tom Bombadil, I see you trying to come in, but it's saying, here you are. It was saying your device wasn't connected, but now you are. There's the man.
Happening, Tom?
StreamYard. Why can't they just come in?
What? You gotta mute us there.
Yeah.
Because then anyone can come in.
Oh, what's wrong?
So on the YouTube, just
close the YouTube in the background there.
Yeah, close out your YouTube or mute your YouTube.
There we go.
Good.
Yep.
Awesome.
There he is.
All right. So,
What's happening, bro?
What's up, guys? Great show today. I'm loving it.
Good.
I had a question. Okay, so what about this verse in Corinthians where St. Paul says, all things are permissible, but not all things are beneficial? And then the context is like somebody sleeping with their mother-in-law. Okay, that's pretty bad. Compared to like sleeping with your girlfriend, what's the difference there?
You'll have some genetic problems for sure.
And it's all
that's what he meant, Amos.
I mean, what would you call it? Sleeping with your mother-in-law? That would be what? Incestuous adultery?
With your mother-in-law, you get
mother-in-law. Okay, never mind. I thought mother. I'm like, well, definitely can't do this.
So it's some stepson porn that's going on there. They're not actually related.
Paul was predicting shit.
Tom, I'd put it to you this way. It goes back into the conversation we're having about how do you live your life? And, you can live it by rules externally, and there's nothing wrong with that. The church has a lot of tradition of applying rules. As I shared about the Orthodox Church watering down the wine, it's because they didn't want people to be drunk. But what Paul is advocating for is you live by faith in the Christ in you. And there are no defined rules with that, right? That is an act of faith. A great example is my addiction to porn, for instance. I have this story on my YouTube channel and elsewhere. Just like most men, I had a massive addiction to porn, and I did all of the rules. I was praying all the time, reading, fasting. I had accountability programs. I blocked it. I blocked websites. I did all of the Christian discipline plus all of the practical works. But no external practical discipline can change the effects of my heart. right? As in fact, sorry to steal from the guy's video, he actually did get that right, where it's just behavior modification. It doesn't change the heart. So I had a conversation with God, and I just was just real honest and be like, I do not want to stop watching porn. I like it. The reason I do it is because I like it. And straight up, I said, if you want me to stop this, you need to change my heart. But I'm done. I'm not going to fight this anymore. That is an act of faith. That is absolute faith that Christ in me is going to make a change. So what ended up happening? About 3 weeks later, the addiction part of it broke. Like I did not have that driving force to go and watch porn, but I had a habit. I'd been doing it for so long, and the habit took a little longer to break. But there's none of me in that. That is actual. This is what Paul is testifying to. The seed of soft parts of our life that is not what he wants us to do. That's why we can trust it. If we have true faith, we can trust it. The problem is most people don't really believe the Christ is in them. Especially the church doesn't even believe it. They want to try and corral people, and they're trying to do the work of Christ, not giving people time to mature. So Paul is saying, if you live by the faith of the Christ in you, you can do anything, but that doesn't always mean it's beneficial or edifying. Right. I right now I go and smoke some crack, and then I'm, that's going to destroy my life. Right. Or I go and steal a car, I get locked up. It doesn't benefit me to do that.
But if you do go smoke meth, is that going to lose your salvation? No. Right?
No. But we should do an entire episode on salvation and what is the gospel and stuff like that.
Definitely.
So yeah, good works are a fruit of the Spirit. It is something that because we've experienced the transformation and we're trusting the Christ, he does the works through us, and that's how we get the good works. But it's not a requirement, which is the point he's making. So I hope that helps.
Yeah.
Well, 2 minutes. So you want to make one final point there, Tom? You've been making some good points in the chat, by the way.
Yeah, I think, Brooke, you're going to really like Justin Abraham over there in Cardiff. He's very much about, and then you guys don't know who it is. He's a mystic. He's very much about like taste.
You froze up.
Lost you there, Tom.
And see that the Lord keeps rules. It's more like we enter into life as opposed to avoiding death,
Correct.
Yeah.
One thing I remember I used to tell people was, you always hear the word, well, you just accept Jesus into your heart and you'll experience eternal life. And the more I kind of like it broke that down and, the prayer and all this stuff, I just realized, oh, you're talking about eternal afterlife. Say your prayer, accept Jesus into your heart, put your head down, put your hand up, so I'll just be your witness to your salvation. You'll have the greatest life after you're dead. It's like, what about now? Like, now you got to stack chairs. Stack chairs, pay your tithes. And then your prosperity gospel and kind of takes that and just, says, screw all that, be prosperous now. But then it goes overboard into like,
yeah. Jesus died on the cross to make you skinny, rich, and happy. That's basically the crux of the prosperity.
He died on the cross and he was skinny. But there wasn't
he was
much
jacked. Didn't you know? He was like, jacked, tanned, and juicy as AF.
Oh, by the way, that reminds me, guys, we got to make a confession here. I'll make one. Who else had a Lord's Gym t-shirt when they were in high school and got made fun of for it?
What now?
Do you remember those Lord's Gym t-shirts?
Lord's Gym. Oh, that's an American thing. I didn't have that.
We'll probably go over a few minutes, but you guys will
it's fine, man.
I'll pull it up.
Lord's Gym.
Corey, you feeling better, man?
Well, yeah, I got a good wave out, so I feel like that, that deflated balloon afterwards, I got the deflated balloon going on. But by the way, I'm CONK, longtime listener, first time caller.
Oh, hey, CONK.
Yeah, I just wanted to introduce myself real quick. But I think I put it in the chat a little bit, but the whole God does break rules for alphas and makes rules for betas. and how that relates to Paul talking about weak Christians, where he talks about, babies
Immature
need milk,
Christians,
they can't
yeah.
handle the meat. And First and Second Corinthians is just full of a bunch of really young Christians that were pretty bad at it.
Whoa. Oh man.
Nice.
Oh,
Oh.
God.
No, that's
That's
an
what I-
American thing. I didn't have that.
CrossFit.
Yeah, man, that's part of that Christian
CrossFit.
kosher.
Dude, I mean,
World.
a lot of people kind of go on and on. I mean, we could do another episode about this, but you get some interesting takes where people are going on and on about how in the Corinthians they're like, oh, the gifts of the Spirit, and it's so cool, you're doing all this stuff, and you realize like if you realize what was going on in the Corinthian church for them to experience that.
Mhm.
Geez, what would you experience if you actually had your shit together? Like,
Yeah.
Yep. And then, the other part of that is when he also talks about, don't cause your Christian brother to stumble because he has the rules on what he eats, even though you don't, kind of thing. And
Correct.
so I think almost most of those laws, like relating it to weak Christians or betas or whatever lingo you want to use, most laws are like self-made, if that makes sense. You know your own blind spots. You know what causes you personally as a subjective thing to sin and make your own rules, but it becomes problems when you blanket statement to others, because then you start going all Karen, right?
I was waiting for the Karen bomb to drop.
At least one episode.
Every
At least
episode.
once in an episode.
Well, listen, guys, we're at the end of the show, so let's wrap up with our final thoughts. Hey, Tom, I appreciate you calling in, brother. Maybe we'll see you next week, all right?
did you actually? Oh, he's
Conk went?
Yeah, Tom bounced himself out.
I
dude.
thought you bumped him out. I'm like, what are you doing, buddy?
It
Panel.
can only be one.
I feel like Tom would act like it. So basically, here's my closing thought, guys. I love one of the very first things that Pope Francis said when he was elected in 2013, when he succeeded Benedict XVI, is he said that the essence of the gospel is an encounter with a living person. It's not so much a set of rules, it's more so an encounter. And here's how he explained that difference, okay? And I think this will put a nice bow on everything, and I look forward to hearing your guys' closing thoughts. He said that the essence of Christianity is not saying no to a bunch of stuff. Like, no, I won't fornicate. No, I won't get drunk. No, I won't blah, 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 right? That's not what Christianity is. Even though there's a bunch of thou shalt nots, okay? It's the essence of it is saying yes. When you have that encounter with Christ, you're saying yes. That's where it all starts with your yes to Jesus. But that yes also occasionally will require you to say some no's, because there are things that are incompatible with your walk with Christ. When those things surface in your life, and they probably surface 100 times today in my life, that's when we say no. But being a Christian is not a negative experience. We're not defined by what we don't do. It's like John Paul II said, we're an Easter people. We're an Alleluia people. We're like, Christians should be known by their hope and their joy, not by their prudishness or by their whatever it is that they do. That's the flip side of that. So those are kind of my closing thoughts. And that, guys, is how I'm able to tie religion and spirituality. That's how I think they can live in perfect harmony. When I said at the beginning of the show that I feel like they're compatible, that's how they're compatible. Saying yes to Jesus is having that experience that enables you to say no to other things that would separate him from us. So that's my final thought.
Amen.
How about you, bro?
Amen. I like that. I like what you said there. I don't think we can be separated from Christ. So, that again, the incarnation shows that Christ is in us and stuff like that. So I'm not as worried. In fact, a God that might flee from us when we're in trouble is probably not really much of a savior. But it's when we were at our worst, he gave us his best. He came and showed that he will never leave us nor forsake us. So I love what you said in that respect. And I would agree. I think religion and spirituality probably have two different ends. And I think that's probably where there is a slight disconnect. So even if we took it outside the realms of Christianity is a very easy cover. And I think I don't really care what stream of Christianity you are, you're probably in it. And I would go so far as to say that you can even be a Muslim or even be a Buddhist, and you can still have a relationship with Christ. Because I don't think the traditions hold the same weight as that encounter. That encounter with a person transcends all of the traditions. Now, once you have that encounter, you might want to pick a tradition to be a part of, which is completely fine. As we said, the early church, they were in a completely different religion. And the first major encounter was the Apostle Paul, knocked off his horse on his way to do some pretty bad things to some Christians. And that's why I think the gospel message is so much bigger than we can really contain in our traditions, which makes it universal because it can go into any culture. It can go into any country. Not that, and it will probably have a transformative effect. By my definition of religion, I think it's something external. We're trying to amend, to something outside of us. I don't hold to that kind of theology. Christ is in us. The incarnation has settled that once and for all. He promised to never leave us nor forsake us. And through his spirit, he guides us into the life and the plan that he has for us if we'd only believe it. So I'd close with that.
Excellent.
Yeah, cheers. Amen, bro. Amen.
Yeah. So you're both wrong, and I'm right.
That's right. That's right.
So I mean, the way I think of it is, different times in my life I've experienced like different, I guess, needs or just phases where religion and spirituality kind of just go in different degrees. Every now and then, if I'm like essentially, out of respect or in a way forced against my will, I guess, I don't know how you want to put it, I have to go to Catholic Mass with the family.
Why would you say it like that when we have Bobby on the show, man?
And it's no offense. It's just, with the different beliefs, and it's just because growing up with it was so different. Like the difference between a Catholic Mass and certain, evangelical, Pentecostal, different churches like that. I'm getting to, but think about this. It's going to end on a good note here. So the moments that I have gone to these masses and such, as I basically kind of like, you want to say matured or learned more and having more experiences, I basically would be in the middle of, mass, doing everything I'm doing, listening to the homily, going through everything that they're going through. And, obviously a lot of it, almost a muscle memory kind of comes back, and I'm doing all this. And partway through it, there's the hymns and everything. And I started, the last few times that I went to Mass, there was actually a sense of like fulfillment to it. That was very different than the sense of fulfillment that I would get from like the crazier experiences like Christian summer camp, and you're, slain in the spirit for like 6 hours or whatever, when you're probably just dehydrated. And I think anyone, depending upon where their heart is, can experience spiritual things in religious settings just about anywhere. People that are listening to a song in their car, people who are experiencing prayer in their own home, someone who is, you can have a spiritual moment just seeing something that somehow triggers a memory, triggers an experience that you had a long time ago. And you get all these like weird definitions, I think, are like very constraining to say, well, this is religious and this is spiritual. And it really just depends on the person. Like someone could have a way more spiritual experience than, and be in a completely, what would be considered like a very religious setting, doing all the traditions, like more strict than a properly done Mass, done in all in Latin, just really down to it. Like you get kicked out if you do anything wrong, whatever. I don't know, like really crazy stuff. Someone could get an experience in that way more spiritual or not. You might have a whole entire spectrum of that in that church, just depending upon where people's hearts are. But then you have someone that's getting way too religious about getting, slain in the spirit. people that are like believing I have to do this, I have to do that. You hear about courtesy falls. You got people that are trying to yell amen, louder than the next guy to whatever the pastor says. And that's a religious thing. That's more religious in a supposed free spiritual setting than the guy that's over here doing all the right things, all the rituals, and he's having a way deeper spiritual experience. It just depends on where the heart of the person is. So that's my belief, which is kind of, where it's, for what Bobby likes to do, that brings him fulfillment. Whether we might disagree or agree on certain parts of the theology behind that, he gets what he gets, and that's what's important. Brooke over here, I don't know what he does. No,
I don't know sometimes myself.
What's that?
The Orthodoxes.
Yeah, they're like floating around in churches and stuff.
Never heard of Brother Lawrence? We get high washing dishes, man.
But that's just some of my thoughts on that. It's you got these guys, again, the video is so cringe because it's not genuine. You can see what's genuine by someone's heart, and when you see what they're doing, it's like, oh, he's just doing the motions, or this guy actually wants to be here. And everyone's at a different place. Some people want to talk about different levels, but it's just everyone's in a different place.
Yeah. Amen.
Well, good show, guys. Went a little bit over, but that was fine. But I like how in show number 6, we're finally starting to get some scholarly spice. Like,
wait till we're at 666, man.
Feel free to disagree, man. Because like I said, I always use the analogy, you got 2 hot dog stands competing on a hot summer day. The people that are going to benefit are the hungry people walking down the street, right? They're going to benefit from lower prices, higher quality. So good stuff. Good show, guys.
I'm good with that, bro.
Absolutely. So everybody who's watching, smash the like button. Please subscribe to the channel. Whose channel are we hosting on next week? And what's the topic going to be? Have we come up with one?
I think we go back to CONK, right?
Okay.
I think
so.
I think the order would be CONK, then me, then Amos, then you, then back to CONK.
Now,
So
we have Abu America next week, right?
Yes. Abu American is coming on.
Okay. And do you guys know the topic with Abu American?
Not yet. We'll probably do some research and discuss that in the group privately.
Well, we'll have it to you guys by Wednesday. We usually try to release the show by Wednesday, or at least the link to the show, just so you guys can have a heads up on it.
Get it scheduled. We'll get it figured out.
Yep, we'll get it figured out, guys. Well, thanks for tuning in, everybody. We'll see you next Sunday. And thanks for tuning in to show number 6 of Religion Zero. Signing off.
Thanks for watching, guys.